Here is a set of Hoya ND filters from Japan. But before talking about this specific product, let's see what an ND filter is for in videography and in photography. Check it out. Now, to show you what these ND filters do for videography, I went to the park and shot a couple of angles for you. Let's look at the first clip. This clip is shot without ND filters. We have some people riding the bicycle on a dark background. You see, the people are kind of like jogging behind the camera. Now, this is the same shot, but with ND filters. Here you see that we get a way smoother motion. But let's compare the two clips one another. On the left side we don't have ND filters, and on the right we have ND filters. Why does the motion look so jagged on the left side compared to the right side? That's because on the right side we actually have way more time for the camera to capture the light. Now what happens when you put an ND filter? You let less light come into the camera, and this allows you to leave the camera open for a longer period of time. So in this case, with an object which is moving, if we leave the camera open for a longer period of time, what happens is that the camera is sampling not just the object in one precise position, but the object moving. And this gives exactly the motion blur effect, which is very important to get a shot which looks nice and a shot which doesn't look like the motion is broken. The shot on the right, done with these techniques, even though if I stop on a single frame it doesn't look like it's well focused, overall if I look it as a video it will look way better and the motion will be way smoother. Now let's move on. This second shot is a pan shot, so in this case nothing is moving but our camera. And again, if you compare the shot without the ND filter and the shot with the ND filter, I have to say the shot with the ND filter looks much better. And in both cases, we are using a gimbal, so this picture is heavily stabilized. But what changes there is not the way we shoot our picture or the stabilization of the camera, is rather the amount of time we leave the camera open. And having the camera open for a long period of time allows us to get this very nice motion blur, which makes the image look so pleasing and the motion look so natural. So we definitely want to leave these ND filters on for this little walk in the park. Let's try to evaluate the performance of this filter, because there's a lot of different ND filters on the market and you want to pick the best for you and for your budget. Those filters are quite cheap. They cost around 20 euro each, so definitely not expensive. But how about the performance? Now, this first picture that you see here has been taken without any ND filter. We have a very complex scene with a very bright facade of a house. We have a very dark scene from the trees, so it's actually one of the scenes which is difficult to capture in camera and which allow us to discover if there is any defect in the image. This is the scene without the filter, and we had to step down the exposure to quite a lot, to 1/1000. The second picture is taken with this ND filter. In this case I used an ND8 filter, so 3 stops of light. As you can see, it looks basically the same. There's only a slight shift in colors. I have to say the color got a little bit cooler, something around 100 degrees Kelvin, in case you're wondering, in case you want to post correct this with grading. Nothing dramatic. There is no visible vignetting or whatsoever. And the image looks slightly softened on the shadows and on the highlight. So those are two things which are unwanted, because obviously your ND filter should be as clear as possible, but no ND filter is perfect. By the way, those images are straight out of the camera. They look very good, both of them. The impact of this filter is quite minimal, so they are not going to require dramatic color grading in order to be used. At the same time, I have to say I also like having a slightly cooler image when I'm shooting outside in the bright sun and I always get very warm color, these filters kind of does the job for me to cool down the picture a little bit, taking out a little bit of contrast and shadow and make it a little bit softer. I kind of like it more with the ND filters on. Now, of course, if I use a stronger ND filter, then the effects are slightly more visible, so the color shift is slightly more prominent and the softening of highlight and shadow is more visible. Honestly, again, this is nothing really worrying me. In this case, this particular picture looks slightly worse than the other one, but that's because the ISO went up quite a bit of the camera, and ISO 1250 is definitely not the best ISO for this camera. One thing we want to check out is also how these filters perform on a wider angle. That's what we want to do because, filters like this can have vignetting on the edge, and obviously having a very wide lens stresses this filter out way more. As you can see, there is no visible vignetting or whatsoever. The image looks very good and very bright and very similar to the image without ND filters, just slightly cooler, same for the smaller filter I used before, and slightly softer. So overall, I have to say I'm quite impressed by the performance of these filters, especially given the cost. Alright, we have seen why we want ND filters for videography. The question is, why do we want ND filters for photography? As we mentioned before, using an ND filter means that you can allow the camera to stay open for a longer period of time, even in bright sunlight. And that's exactly what I did here. This picture of the Deutsches Museum has been taken with an exposure time of as much as 10 seconds. So the camera stayed on for 10 seconds capturing this picture. And what happens when you do like this is that the water gets super smooth and the sky as well. That's because in 10 seconds the water is moving and so do the cloud, and because of that you get motion blur both on the clouds and on the water, which makes them silk soft. Now for the next picture we have a shot taken during the night. In this case I'm just hovering a flashlight in front of the camera and I'm getting this very, very nice painting effect, which is achieved by me leaving again the camera open for a very long period of time. We are talking 10 seconds here as well, and moving this flashlight around and making the camera capture the movements of the flashlight. Now, wrapping it up, I've been very impressed by the performance of the Hoya Pro ND filters from Japan. Now, I want to show you how easy it is to screw them on your lens. This is an 18mm lens and 58mm wide, and as you can see it's quite easy to screw it on. And once I screw that on, it's again easy to screw back in this lens hood, which blocks the sunlight from entering on the side of the lens, which is unwanted when we shoot in the bright sunlight. And again, even if I have my ND filters on, I can again put my camera cap. This is the big advantage of fixed ND filters versus variable ND filters. So when it comes to buying ND filters, there are basically two kinds of ND filters. The fixed one, like the one that you have seen today, and the variable one. A variable ND filters is just two polarizers, one next to the other, and when the polarizers are on the same direction, you get a very bright picture. But if you tilt them, rotate them a little bit, what happens is that less light enters the camera, and therefore you get effectively an ND filter. But the disadvantage of variable ND filters is that since they need two parts, they are kind of thick. And having a thick filter means you cannot anymore screw them in like this and still put your camera hood and still put your camera cap. So that's a big disadvantage of variable ND filters. Of course, you need to buy several filters for each stop of light you want to use. But at the same time, if you use a camera with a good ISO range, so a range where the ISO is usable, like this one, the Sony Alpha 7A3, in this case, I have to say from ISO 100 to 800 you get the same quality of the picture, so you can also just take relatively strong ND filters and just use it for all the light which makes sense with that filter, which is kind of a lot of stops in between usable with these particular filters. Now, of course, you might have several lenses for your camera, And you might be thinking, shall I buy several filters? The answer is that's up to you. You can buy a single ND filter, just a very big one, and then use step down ring to basically screw this large ND filter to a small lens. But this removes the convenience to screw in the lens hood and the lens cap. So I actually prefer to buy a couple of ND filters for my different lenses for each of the sizes and just screw them in as necessary. You don't need to have a lot of ND filters, by the way. With this trick of screwing in several ND filters one after the other, you can actually get away by just having an ND3 and an ND6, and this covers basically all your needs. All you have to do if you need an ND9 is just screw the two filters one on top of each other and you will get a very black filter. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you liked, leave me a like, leave me a comment with what you think about it, and see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.